Now I'd like to invite Mr. Paul Polman, CEO, Unilever and Chairman, WBCSD, to deliver the keynote address.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Excellency, distinguished guests, friends. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. It's actually a great honor to stand in front of you at this high-level corporate dialogue ahead of the Sustainable Development Summit. Again, I have to congratulate Terry. What you've built in the last 15 years is remarkable, but it's only possible by personally acknowledging my friend, obviously, and the really, may I call you, founder, Dr. Pachauri, for his leadership, both here at Terry, but also in all of the things that we are working on at a global level. The work that the IPCC has done is obviously enormous, so I think we owe him an enormous debt of gratitude. I don't think, yeah, that's actually right. I've personally seen an enormous change in the discussions, an enormous change in the level of knowledge that CEOs have around these topics, be it at the UN Climate Summit in New York, the World Economic Forum just 2 weeks ago, or many of the other things that we're doing leading up to the COP21. And I think that level of education, that level of knowledge, that level of confidence to do the right thing is only possible because of the enormous education that has happened via him and the IPCC and the courage that they've had to put a lot of the science into the public debate at, may I say, sometimes personal risk. It's also a great pleasure to be here in India, where the perspective of the people I meet is always very refreshing. I can tell you I was here about 1.5 years ago, also in Delhi, as a coincidence, and here again for the last 2 days, had the opportunity to meet the minister as well, and the mood has changed in the country. The mood has changed obviously for the better, but not only for the better for India, for development, but also you are seriously starting to think about and discuss and actually put in action the way you want to develop. And I think there's no better opportunity now to have responsible growth in India to the benefit of all, and I think the world is looking forward to that. In India, in my opinion, sustainable development has never been seen as a challenge, but actually as an opportunity for the right investments in the future. 2015, as some of the previous speakers have mentioned, is absolutely a critical year. We're very fortunate, in fact, that in the same year we have to deal with the development goals post-2015, which are the followers to the Millennium Development Goals. Not surprisingly now, people are talking about calling it Sustainable Development Goals. People understand that if we don't attack the issues of sustainability, there won't be any growth. Planetary boundaries in many countries in this world is already restricting the growth. And then at the same time, the opportunity in December to conclude, hopefully, an ambitious agreement, which is called the COP21 on climate change. If we miss that opportunity, and I hope we don't, but if we miss that opportunity, good luck for the ones that have to explain that to our children. They are actually different sides of the same coin. And I think people increasingly understand that. Now, the role that the Indian business plays is absolutely crucial. Soon you're going to be one of the fastest growing economies. You're the second biggest economy. There's no reason why in the near future you can't become the biggest economy. If India doesn't play a key role in addressing these challenges, we won't solve that in doing. To achieve that cannot be understated. But make no mistake globally, contrary to what you might read in the papers, where often the minority is vocal and the majority is still too silent. But make no mistake. The majority of businesses want our governments to act, but not only that, they want to be a constructive part of the solution, and increasingly so. And everywhere I go, I see that businesses are stepping up to the plate and driving actually their corporate strategies increasingly to a more sustainable strategy for prosperity and economic growth. Now, not surprisingly, with the data revolution that we've seen, the evidence is also overwhelming. A recent study by Oxford and the Smith School of Enterprise and Environment found, for example, that companies that really internalize these socially responsible standards are actually companies that have a lower cost of capital. Not surprising. You're talking here about risk mitigation, you're talking here about cost reductions, you're talking here about being a responsible company. A lower cost of capital translates in higher profitability, everything being equal, and obviously a better share price. That is increasingly appealing to even the hard-nosed capitalists out there that might not believe in some of the things that we're talking about. At least we have the facts here to support it financially. It's therefore not surprising that when we were in New York at the Climate Summit, we got over 1,000 companies to sign the World Bank statement for a price on carbon. In fact, 175 CEOs were at the climate summit. Never ever have there been so many CEOs, obviously outnumbering the heads of states that were there, sending a clear signal that now is the time to take action. Many of these companies actually are reporting on carbon. 80% of the top 4,000 companies are actually reporting on carbon. 200 already have plans to reduce well beyond the 6% a year to stay below the 2 degrees. And actually 50 of these top 200 companies have targets in there to be to mitigate totally the effects of carbon well before 2050. Now, not only are companies and CEOs stepping up to the plate, the financial community is waking up as well. If you would have read what happened in New York in September, you would have seen that 24 trillion of capital, the big funds that we're talking about, are calling for a price on carbon as well, increasingly putting their investment portfolios where their mouth is. Larry Fink was here yesterday as a coincidence, also visiting India. He's been very vocal on having more transparency, looking at the longer term, putting prices on carbon. The financial community is stepping up. And also with their investments, obviously. You heard Rana Kapoor talk about the role that the financial market plays in catalyzing the move to sustainable energy. We see these investments now, 2/3 of the investments are actually coming from the private sector. 50% of the capacity increase globally in the energy sector globally is already in green or sustainable energy. And not surprising, because 40 countries in the world already have a lower price for sustainable energy than they have for carbon-based energy. And that is rapidly becoming true in India as well, where you already have 2 states where that is the case, and I think that equation will only go up between now and the end of this decade. Now, it's not only the CEOs or the financial community, it's also consumers that are stepping up. You saw 300,000 people in the streets in New York and in many other places in the world, demanding action. People will see that, yes, we want growth and we want jobs, but it cannot come at every price. If it comes at the price of livability in cities not being able to breathe, or not using some of the resources that we call basic necessities as a result of climate change, consumers are getting interested as well. Dr. Pachauri already rightfully mentioned the New York Times article, but what is actually remarkable about this New York Times article is that this is happening in the US, which you would not have thought about 5 years ago. These articles would not have appeared in any of these newspapers. Now, according to the same article, 83% of American consumers, so it's not a question of the left or the right or Republicans or Democrats or what you say, 83% of consumers believe that if nothing is done to reduce emissions, global warming will be the most serious problem in the future. That is risky business indeed, and it will affect the elections increasingly so. From the US to China to Europe, we see major countries making commitments to get to this net zero emission by the end of the decade, or I would submit we need it earlier. Momentum is building. Momentum is building at a higher pace than at any time in history. Now, we have embarked on the road to Paris, and frankly, time is ticking. It's in December, early December, and a lot of the hard work has already been done, but we need to keep the pressure up. Nations are hard at work preparing their submissions. They're actually called INDCs, individual targets. The question is, are all these individual targets going to add up to get to this goal of net zero emission? Most likely not. I don't know where we will come out, we'll see that in June, but the chances are that we will not add up to stay within the 2 degrees. And this is really what I want to talk about, because if the general consensus is that the sum of the total in June doesn't add up, what do we need to do as business community to be sure that we get these ambitious agreements in December? And that requires hard work. And it requires the involvement of all of us, including the business community here in India. I would even submit, without the business community in India, I wouldn't have the confidence that we would get an ambitious agreement in December. Today is an important day for you, because you'll put yourselves together around these tables by sector under Jonathan's leadership, Jonathan Porritt, who's here with us, to really see if you can share with each other your ambitions, your commitments that you make in your companies, but more importantly, if you can add up these commitments and these actions to something bigger than what we each are individually able to achieve. And if there is a loud voice coming from India as well, hopefully in your budget at the end of this month, and some clear signs that you also want to go well beyond what is currently committed to stay below the 2 degrees, and the business community speaks up at the same time, I believe we have a fair chance to get a decent agreement in Paris for the benefit of ourselves and future generations. In fact, we're putting businesses together around the world across all of the sectors. Sectors that are familiar to you, like the basic building industry or infrastructure, transportations, food systems, banking, and all of these. We will see with each of these sectors what initiatives are already happening at a global level and how we can drive to scale faster than we would otherwise be possible. What policy measures are needed, what incentives are needed, or sometimes perverse incentives reversed. And that courage, hopefully, will send a big signal to our politicians, again, to come out with more than they otherwise would be capable of. Now, the consumer sector, for example, which is one of the sectors I represent, and you're all familiar with HUL, Hindustan Lever here in India, but obviously at the global level as well, we are very concerned about deforestation. It's interesting, but the whole food chain, 50% of the demand of food that is obviously there because of the population growth and changing dietary habits, 50% of the deforestation actually comes from the demand of food. And deforestation itself is about 15% of global warming. If we don't stop this deforestation, then we will never get to these goals. So it's not surprising that the global consumer goods industry, which is about $3 to $4 trillion globally, has made a commitment by 2020 to not sell anything anymore that comes from what I call illegal deforestation. Our company has already achieved that target last year, but I think we will be able to move the whole industry. That in itself, plus climate smart agriculture, which you can also step up here in India, attacking the food waste, could be about 20 to 30% of global warming alone. That we can reverse and actually result in lower costs. Think about the food that you don't have to waste. Think about the higher productivity you can get off the land. Think about the ecosystems you preserve with the forests that are increasingly important to our livelihood and understood to be so. Enormous opportunities there alone. Can we get these commitments from each of these sectors to add up to this to overall target that we're after? Now, what do we need from governments? Because I don't want to stand here and say this is what business and all of us can do, and I know you will step up to the plate, but we also need to be getting more and clearer signals from the governments. The first thing which business absolutely needs is clarity. If we don't have clarity, we don't invest. I hear that everywhere across every sector. So this policy certainty of saying we want to achieve net zero emission anywhere between 2050 and the end of this decade is absolutely key to unlock a lot of the technologies and investments that are going to accelerate the change. The other thing is the price on carbon. Don't be shy on that. Things in business that we don't measure, we don't treasure. Overwhelmingly, people understand now that if there is a price on carbon, and it is not very practical to expect a global price right now, but let's start with normal pricing systems at a local or regional level. And again, many countries or many regions have experimented with that already and seeing the positive effects, including, by the way, in the US, where you have some states that have a price on carbon. We need to insist on that. Then we need to work on the financing. There is no doubt that we can catalyze financing. It's a very important meeting coming up this summer in July in Addis Ababa. We need to be sure that, again, we have the financing right, which has two sides of the coin. It is the right financing to catalyze extra funds from business. And by the way, business will continue to provide 70, 80, 90% of the funding. By the way, business globally, it's about 60% of the global economy. It's about 80% of the global financial flow and 90% of the job creation. I could not find a better arguments why we need to work hand in hand with governments to solve these issues. But think about the money that has been committed by governments in the Red Plus Fund, the Green Climate Fund, all talking about 100 billion or more. Think about how much more money that will catalyze. Now think also about the opportunity that we have with the lower oil prices right now to take to take these perverse subsidies that are still lingering across the world in perverse fuel subsidies out of the system. In fact, some people estimate that between 800 million and 1 trillion, 800 billion and 1 trillion of perverse subsidies are still there, driving you actually to a carbon economy at a time that we can afford at least. And then finally, we need from governments the courage to look at all of these challenges that we have and encourage these public-private partnerships that we're talking about to galvanize this change. Now, during the last 12 months, I've had the privilege to serve on the Global Commission of the Economy and Climate. It's actually chaired by President Felipe Calderón, who will be here tonight and tomorrow, I believe. And it also included the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, which is located right here in Delhi. So it certainly had a lot of your input in there. And tomorrow, the Global Commission will launch the latest report, in this case on India, which is entitled Pathways to Sustainable Rapid Development in a New Climate Economy. The report's authors argue that through good choices in simply 3 sectors, the 3 sectors are energy systems, cities, and land use, India can boost its economic development, ensure inclusive growth, and reduce the risk of dangerous climate change. In fact, 6 to 7% of total GDP, 1% additional growth a year, can be unlocked by attacking just those 3 areas holistically. Yes, all at the same time, no misplaced trade-offs in any of these. Now that's good for business if you ask me. The report's recommendations recognize that this visionary path already has been started. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to meet the Prime Minister Modi and actually listening to all of your plans, be it smarter cities, be it Make in India, be it Clean India, obviously directly linked to the development agenda, but an opportunity to do that smartly and attack at the same time the issues of climate change that we're talking today. And that development is more needed than ever. Over 300 million people still in India lack the access to modern energy and are waiting for it. 50% of your energy is still provided by simply wood burning. 1 million people lose their lives every year unnecessarily on things we can change if we decide to do that and make the same commitments as your government has taken with clean toilets and other things in the areas of sanitation. It can be done. Today's oil prices, as I said before, is an ideal time to move even further on your fuel reforms and move to a greener economy. And you can do that actually while still having net positive revenues, cashing in on the enormous fuel savings that you make with the lower prices that we have. It's also the case in India that we find half the world's polluted cities. You take the 30 top polluted cities, 15 of the top 30 are in India. Delhi certainly hits the charts. And people will not accept that much longer. Even in my business, we have issues in actually growing in this. The urbanization has moved from 200 million to 400 million in the last 15, 20 years, and will move to 600 million in India. Even right now, in places like Mumbai, our products, the ability for us to sell products is already limited by the availability of water and other things that are directly affected by climate change. Our growth is already being stifled, and I think that is the case for other companies as well. So this new climate economy report, I encourage you to read that and see if there are any things that you in your businesses can actually pick up on and drive to scale as well. And then the last area is agriculture. Fortunately, you are in a good position to feed yourselves, but agriculture is not actually the most efficient profession that you have right now. So we need to move rapidly to climate smart agriculture there as well, which has an enormous climate component to it. There's no shortage of opportunities here, as has been mentioned before. There is no better time for Indian business to seize this moment in a way that meets your needs as businesses to grow, but also meets the needs of the people, especially the ones at the bottom of the pyramid that have been desperately waiting for it. It is clear that the agenda on which we are now embarking is an exciting one, but it certainly is a transformational one. A transformational one for companies, but more importantly, for individuals, for families, for whole communities, and indeed for the future of India. Infrastructure, cleaner energies, healthier consumers, happier employees, all result in faster growing economies. I've often said that you cannot have a healthy business in an unhealthy world. And if you ever had been persuaded before that delivering sustainable development and tackling climate change are in some ways a constraint to growth, I hope that you now recognize that actually the opposite is true. If we don't tackle climate change, we won't get the growth. This is only the beginning, I think, of this pathway that we need to get on. I hope you're embracing that as much as we do, for the benefit of everybody, but above all, for the benefit of the people that cannot be here, which are actually the poor themselves who suffer the most from that. And I think whatever we do today, whatever we talk for our companies, let's keep in mind why we're here. Thank you very much.